Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 2023 Consulting webinar. My name is Michael Mathis, and I am the Client Services Director here at CDI, and today we are going to explore the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. If you need help at any time during the webinar, please post questions in the questions box at any time. We will be monitoring the questions and we will be providing time at the end of today's webinar to go out over any questions you may have. If you need immediate assistance, please raise your hand and we will be able to unmute you to address any questions or concerns you may have. And some tips for success for today's webinar. Be sure to take good notes and screenshots. I find it useful to notate how far into the webinar or a timestamp to be able to quickly find where we were in the webinar. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We love answering all of your questions and hearing all of your questions. Please complete the survey that will be sent out after the webinar. We love hearing your feedback and your ideas for future topics. And remember, this webinar will be recorded and available on the CDI YouTube channel within a couple of days after the webinar. At this point, we'll begin to explore the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. The intended audience for today's webinar is going to be Laserfiche administrators and network administrators. If you are neither a Laserfiche nor network administrator, please do stay in the webinar. There will be plenty of valuable information for everyone. Our agenda for the webinar today. First, we will review the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. Then we will configure the Deployment Toolkit and preview the installation script. So what is the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit? The Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit is a set of scripts and resources run from the central machine. We will define these machine names on our next slide. The Deployment Toolkit is going to be used to deploy Laserfiche applications in an automated and repeatable way to one or more client machines. This will allow you to easily configure multiple environments that are going to be identical, so you can then have a test environment and a production environment. The Deployment Toolkit is configurable via a user interface and can now upgrade supported Laserfiche applications from previous versions to the latest Laserfiche 11 version. These scripts are compatible with Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022, and this includes machines in an AWS or Azure environment. The Laserfiche Toolkit architecture is going to be split up into two different types of machines. First, we have our central machine, and this is the machine that's going to host the Deployment Toolkit package and runs the installation script. The client machines are going to be a machine, it can be one or more client machine, where Laserfiche applications are going to be deployed. So in our image here, we have our central machine, and that's communicating with client machine 1 to install the Laserfiche server, Laserfiche Windows client, Laserfiche administration console, and Laserfiche workflow. And client machine 2 will deploy the Laserfiche directory server, Laserfiche web client, and Laserfiche forms. In the latest version of the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit, they introduced some exciting new features. These include the support for installing and upgrading audit trail with basic configuration. The toolkit will now detect pending reboots due to Windows updates on target machines, perform installations on the machines where the script is run without having to provide additional credentials, and it is now compatible with all released Laserfiche 11 packages. There are various requirements for the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. These are all documented in generalprocess.md, available from the Deployment Toolkit. The .NET Framework 4.8 and Visual Studio C++ redistributable for Visual Studio 2019 do need to be pre-installed. This will require PowerShell version 5. PowerShell 6 and 7 are not currently supported. Remote execution of PowerShell scripts will need to be enabled on all client machines. Any SSL certificates will need to be pre-installed on those machines, and you will need your master license or activation key for the directory server. To configure the deployment toolkit, Laserfiche provides an easy-to-use user interface. You have the ability to save and load deployment scripts. This allows you to make edits and changes as needed and no longer need to reconfigure every time. You can deploy to one or more machines locally in AWS or in Azure. We have the ability to configure global settings such as SQL and email. We can override these settings for specific applications. And we can define the various applications to install and these settings to use for installation. The first page that we are going to look at of the configuration user interface is going to be the General Settings tab. And here we can select our installation mode of new installation or upgrade. Any passwords and sensitive information in the configuration file can be encrypted, and we will need to provide and confirm our encryption key. Make sure to not lose this encryption key because it will be needed to run the deployment script and to edit or change any settings when we reload the script in the configuration. Under environment, we can select our type of environment, whether it's local, AWS, or Azure. And we can define our global settings for SQL and email servers. This includes our server name, username, and password, as well as various configurations for the SMTP settings. Next, we are going to define the machines, the client machines that we are going to deploy to. We can add one or more machines for deployment, and we will need to specify the fully qualified machine name and the TLS certification thumbprint. Information on how to find this thumbprint is available in the configuration UI under the Learn More link. We can also configure the paths for scripts, logs, installation packages, and installation directories. And we can provide this information for any number of machines. Next, we'll look at configuring applications. And here we can add applications to each of the defined machines. There are many Laserfiche applications available, such as the Laserfiche Server, Laserfiche Web Client, Laserfiche Desktop Client, and Laserfiche Forms. We will review all of the different applications available later in our webinar. Applications may require additional configuration once they are added to a machine, and this additional configuration will be available under the Edit Settings button for the application. In these additional configuration areas, we can choose to use the global settings that we defined for our SQL Server or email, or we can override these global settings to use settings specific for this instance of the application. Finally, we have the opportunity to review our configuration. Here we can see all of our configuration information and ensure it is all correct. And using the generate configuration file in the bottom right-hand corner, we'll generate the .json file with all of the settings that we have defined here. For deployment, using the deployment toolkit, we will use the script Laserfiche install and config.ps1 to begin our deployment. This PowerShell script will use the configuration file named install-config.json located in the same directory. If you have multiple configurations, for example, one for test and one for production, we can save those .json files in a different folder or name them install-config.test.json, .prod.json, and rename the appropriate JSON file when we are deploying. The deployment script is going to be launched from a central machine, and all of the installation media and scripts are going to be temporarily copied to the target machines and will be cleaned up automatically once that deployment is complete. Laserfiche does provide documentation and troubleshooting information. All of this documentation is in Markdown format. If you don't know what Markdown is, it is a structured text syntax where you can format your text using special characters. These files are able to be viewed in Notepad or any other text file viewer. Or there are plenty of browser plugins available, so you could open the Markdown file through a Chrome or Edge extension to view the formatted version. I prefer to use Visual Studio Code, which is free from Microsoft, and that's what we will see during the live demonstration. The general process.md file is going to detail the process of configuring and deploying Laserfiche applications using the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. This document will detail all of the prerequisites and system requirements for the central machine, as well as the client machines. All client machines will need to meet the system requirements defined for the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit, as well as the system requirements for the applications being deployed. This document also contains useful troubleshooting information, which will be very helpful if any issues occur during deployment. The install config doc.md file will provide detailed information on the JSON file format. So if you would like to make any adjustments or changes after you're done in the UI, you can edit that JSON file, and the information is available in this document. And it will also provide additional information and details on the configurations for each of the different supported Laserfiche applications. At this point, we will move into a live demonstration of the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. To get started, I have the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit downloaded and installed on my local machine. And this machine will be my central machine for our demonstration today. To begin, we can launch the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit configuration utility.exe file to open our configuration. And on our first page here, we are welcomed to the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit configuration utility, and we can choose to prepare a file from scratch or based on an existing configuration file. If we select based on existing file, we will browse to the file that we are going to be using. So here I'll select my pre-configured file. And since I provided an encryption key, I will need to enter that encryption key prior to being able to open this file. We are going to cancel out of this dialog and choose Start from Scratch to provide the most information available in our webinar. When we click Next, this will bring us to our General Settings page. Here we can choose our installation mode of New Installation or Upgrade. Toggling between the two options will show or hide the configuration that's needed. For a new installation, we can choose to encrypt our passwords in the configuration file. I do recommend encrypting these passwords because security is very important. After providing our encryption key, we can choose our environment of local, Azure, or AWS. And again, changing our options here will show or hide the needed information. First, we'll need to provide our local environment settings and the path for the installation packages. So you will need to download the Laserfiche Rio or Laserfiche Avante installation packages. And here I have these extracted to C Laserfiche Rio install. I will copy and paste my installation package. If you are going to be deploying this to more than just a single local machine, this will need to be a UNC path. So we'll specify our server / Laserfiche Rio install. All client machines will need to be able to read the, I take that back, that has changed with the newest version. We can specify our local path and these are copied to our client machines. Under our global SQL Server settings, we can specify our SQL Server name and instance if needed, as well as our default credentials. And finally, we can configure our global email settings with the email server name. We can designate this as the default email server for workflow. We'll specify our SMTP server, port, as well as additional information needed. On our next page, we will specify all of our client machines on which we are going to be deploying applications. We have an option to install all applications on the local machine. And with this option, we do not need to provide credentials when running the deployment script to install applications on the same machine where the script is run. So here we can specify our first machine, and we will have our first machine be our app server. We'll need our TLS certification thumbprint. And if we click on the Learn More box, this will bring up information on how to find that certificate thumbprint. We will specify the paths for the scripts, logs, installation packages, the installation directories. If we wanted to install on a different drive, say our E drive, because our C drive is only for the operating system, we can specify that here. And we can also add in additional machines. So here we'll add in a second machine, and this will be our web server. We'll provide our same thumbprint. And here we'll leave our installation directories as are. When we select Next, this is where the fun part happens, where we can specify which applications we are going to be deploying to which servers. So to get started, we will add an application. And first we are going to install our Laserfiche server. We'll select our installation version, 10.4.1, 10.4.2, 10.4.3, or 11. We can enable multiprocessor license, and here we can add in the various repositories that we want to configure. We'll specify our repository name, the repository path, we'll provide our initial volume name, and we'll specify our Laserfiche admin username, our password, and confirm the password, as well as the database name for the Laserfiche repository. If we uncheck the Use Global SQL Server, we can specify a different SQL Server name, username, and password for this application. Here we'll click Save, and we have our repository configured. You can add multiple repositories. With Laserfiche Rio, you are able to deploy as many servers and repositories as you like. With Laserfiche Avante, you are licensed per server and per repository. If you have any questions, please contact your account manager, and they will be able to help you with any licensing. On our app server, we will also add in our Laserfiche client, version 11. This will install the Laserfiche client for us, as well as the Laserfiche administration console. We'll add in our Laserfiche full text server, and we'll add in Laserfiche workflow. Again, we can change our SQL configuration for this application. We also have the option to connect all repositories configured for the Laserfiche server to our Laserfiche workflow installation. On our web server, we will add in our Laserfiche directory server. We'll need to specify our display name, the database name, and we'll choose our activation type, whether we want to activate with an activation key or with a primary license file. When we deploy the Laserfiche directory server, we are able to define the Laserfiche accounts that will automatically be created. So here we can add in our administrators. And we can also add in a group for power users. We can add in as many users as we would like here. So we'll create our admin user, who will be a part of administrators and power users. We also have the option to mark this user as our initial forms system administrator. We are going to leave this box unchecked for the admin user, and we will add in another user called forms admin. Again, this user will be administrators and power users, as well as the initial forms system administrator. We will save our configuration for LFDS, and we'll add in our audit trail configuration. We'll need to specify our Windows accounts that are allowed to access audit trail. And here we'll click Save to add audit trail. We can also add our Laserfiche web client to this server, as well as Laserfiche Forms Professional. And we do have the option to enable Forms Portal if we are licensed for Forms Portal. We'll click Save to add our application. And when we select Next, this will bring us to our review page. And here we can review all of the settings that we have configured. If everything looks correct, we can then select the Generate Configuration file. And this will ask us to choose where to save that file. We can provide the full path and file name. And we have the option to overwrite the existing file if it already exists. We'll click Continue. And that will generate our install config.json file for us. And at this point, we are able to close out of our Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit utility. And in our installation directory, we do have our install config.json file. If we open this in Visual Studio Code, we can see all of the settings that we have configured, and our password is hashed. Within this file, we could then, if we wanted to make a copy for test, for instance, we could come in and edit our machine names this way by adding in test or changing the name however we need to indicate that this is our test server. And then we would be able to do a file save as and save as a different file name. On this first tab, I do have the general process markdown file open. And this is going to explain all of the different options available. We have our list of different core applications that can be installed using the Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit. If we scroll down through our document, we can see our prerequisites for the central machine, which is going to detail the different prerequisites that need to be provided. So Windows PowerShell 5.1, and we need to set the execution policy to remote signed. Client machines have the prerequisites defined below. These do need to be attached to an Active Directory domain. You will need to verify the required ports are open on the firewall. We have our Laserfiche requirements of a master activation key or a licensed directory server site, as well as the application requirements of 10.4.2 or above. And again, the target machines will need to meet the minimum system requirements for the applications being installed. Below this, we have all of the instructions for all of the different configurations that will be needed for Azure, AWS, or local machines. We have information on preparing the configuration file, which we had just gone over. And finally, at the bottom, we have all of our troubleshooting steps. Now that we have our Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit configuration created, we can then open up Windows PowerShell, and we do need to run as an administrator. And to begin the deployment, we will run /Laserfiche install and config.ps1. This is going to ask us for our encryption key that we provided in the configuration file. And finally, we will need to log into the machines that we are configuring. And I do not have all of the prerequisites configured because watching 20 minutes of a PowerShell script is not going to be a very fun webinar. If you do have any questions on any troubleshooting steps, in this case, I would need to enable WinRM on my machine and enable the Windows PowerShell remote execution option on the client machines. If we did want to edit our configuration after it has been created, for example, if we specified an invalid SQL Server password, we can run our configuration utility exe again. And this time, instead of start from scratch, we will select based on existing configuration file. We can browse to our file, provide our encryption key, and as we go through, we can see that all of our configurations have been saved and are available for editing as needed. That concludes the live demonstration portion of our webinar today. If you do have any additional questions, we have various resources available, such as Laserfiche Answers, the Laserfiche Solutions Exchange, the Laserfiche Support site, and the CDI YouTube channel. Please feel free to contact us at consulting, sales, or support at citiesdigital.com. Again, thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Michael Mathis. I am the Client Services Director at CDI, and I will remain on the webinar to answer any questions that you may have. I see a hand raised from Sarah, and Sarah, I am going to send you an unmute request so you can ask your question.
Hey Matthew, this is Sarah. I just wanted to check if this is for a totally new install or will it be used for in-place upgrade also?
The Laserfiche Deployment Toolkit can be used for a new install as well as for upgrading an existing installation. For upgrading of existing installations, you will need to be on one of the supported versions, which is 10.4.1 or above.
Okay. Okay. Good to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any additional hands raised, and I don't see any additional questions at this time. So again, thank you all very much for taking the time out of your busy day to attend today's webinar. If you do have any other questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.